Jinnah of Pakistan by Stanley Wolpert. Chapter 4 Lucknow to Bombay, 1916 to 1918. For Jinnah, 1916 was a year of national fame and good fortune. After helping to save the Muslim League from dissolution in Bombay, he was elected to lead it to new heights of hope in Lucknow, capital of the once mighty Mughal Nawabs of Oudh. While Europe tore itself apart all along the poison gas filled Western Front, India advanced under Jinnah's inspiring leadership towards a political horizon that seemed ablaze with the golden dawn of imminent freedom. Jinnah was re-elected for a second term to Bombay's Muslim seat on the Central Legislative Council and used that forum to good advantage in presenting the Congress League proposals, once drafted to London. Congress had appointed its own committee headed by Motilal Nehru, 1861 to 1931, who invited its members to his palatial Allahabad house in April to discuss the proposed reforms with League leaders. Part of the fortune he had earned as a lawyer was lavished on hospitality and support for Congress and for Mrs. Besant's Home Rule League, which Motilal funded most generously. Elder Nehru admired Jinnah, introducing him to friends at this time as unlike most Muslims, a keen nationalist as any of us. He is showing his community the way to Hindu-Muslim unity. For a while, they supported one another in the Central Legislative Council. But by the late 1920s, Motilal and Jinnah became bitter rivals. Motilal, a fierce advocate and tenacious wrestler, wanted personally to lead India's nationalist movement to independence, or hoped at least to bequeath such power to his son. Jinnah, the Lincoln's Inn barrister, would never rest content simply to assist a provincial pleader, no matter how great his fortune happened to be. That April, as Congress and the League labored in Allahabad to draft the Freedom Pact that was to be sealed at Lucknow, Dublin lay shattered in ruins under martial law. The Easter Rising of 1916 was as brutally crushed by Kitchener's army in the Ireland as was General John Nixon's Indian army by disease, incompetence, and Turkish troops in Mesopotamia that same month. Contrary to all rational expectation, shattering every civilized hope and dream, the war continued, intensifying rather than abating in its blind fury, with the incredible death toll of its rage mounting every moment. Indian demands for direct representation with the self-governing dominions at the Imperial Conference intensified. Crewe left the India office, replaced by Austen Chamberlain, 1863 to 1937 in May. Hardinge found it impossible to ignore Indian demands for a greater role in deliberations, agreeing that India's claim to a representative voice at all imperial conferences was just, with Curzon and Kitchener still dominating the war cabinet. However, Hardinge was ignored. By mid-1916, he left India and was replaced as viceroy by an uninspired and uninspiring cavalry captain, Lord Chelmsford, 1868 to 1933. From his meeting in Allahabad, Jinnah went north to Darjeeling to escape the next 2 months of intense Bombay heat by vacationing at the summer home of his client and friend, Sir Dinshaw Manockji Petit, 1873 to 1933. The Petits were one of Bombay's wealthiest Parsi families, textile magnates whose vast fortune was begun by Sir Dinshaw's enterprising great-grandfather, who came to Bombay from Surat in 1785 and worked as a shipping clerk and Dubash, two-language interpreter for the British East India Company. French merchants who dealt with this bright, very small Parsi clerk dubbed him Le Petit Parsi. The nickname became his descendants' surname. His son, Manockji Petit, found Bombay's first successful cotton mill, which grew into the sprawling Manockji Mills complex in Tardeo. The first Baronet Sir Dinshaw started Bombay's Powerful Mill Owners Association in 1875, which he chaired from 1879 to 1894. He also served as one of the 5 trustees of Bombay's Parsi community's most sacred matters, marriage, succession laws, and proper disposition of the dead upon the Towers of Silence. The elder Sir Dinshaw had been instrumental in securing British legal recognition and public promulgation of Parsi Succession and Marriage Acts, which he personally helped administer. The Petit family was thus not only among the richest but also one of the most devout Orthodox Parsi families in Bombay by the end of the 19th century. With the death of the first Sir Dinshaw in 1901, his entire name, fortune, and religious duties and responsibilities passed on to his son, whose first child and only daughter, Ratanbai, had been born the previous year on February 20th, 1900. Ruthie, as she came to be called, was a thoroughly enchanting child, precociously bright, gifted in every art, beautiful in every way. As she matured, all of her talents, gifts, and beauty were magnified in so delightful and unaffected a manner that she seemed a fairy princess, almost too lovely, too fragile to be real. And her mind was so alert, her intellect so lively and probing that she took as much interest in politics as she did in romantic poetry and insisted on attending every public meeting held in Bombay during 1916, always sitting, of course, in the first row, chaperoned by her multi-millionaire philanthropist maiden aunt, Miss Mamabai Petit. That summer, when Ruthie was 16 and Jinnah was at least 40, they shared the Petit Chateau within view of Mount Everest, perched 7,000 feet high in the idyllic town of Thunderbolt, Darjeeling, where only the choicest tea plants and the silent snow-clad mountain peaks and isolated trails witnessed the passionate glances of longing and love that passed between these two. That October in 1916, Jinnah presided over the Bombay Provincial Conference in Ahmedabad, the textile capital of Gujarati wealth and power. Jinnah proposed transforming provincial governments such as that of Bombay into virtually autonomous administrations responsible to elected representatives of the people, Muslims and Hindus, wherever they are in a majority, having proper, adequate and effective representation. As to all district and municipal governments, Jinnah reiterated the arguments of liberals, Ripon and Morley, insisting that they should be wholly elected, that the present official control exercised by the collectors and commissioners should be removed, that the chairman should be elected by the boards, and the ex officio president should be done away with, that a portion of excise revenue or some other definite source of revenue should be made over to these bodies so that they may have adequate resources at their disposal for the due performance of their duties. It would have meant no less than transforming the all-powerful Indian civil service into true servants of the responsible Indian opinion. Jinnah's radical proposals for change did not, however, stop there. He also demanded an end to the unjust application of the Arms Act to the people of India, from which the Europeans are exempted, called for the repeal of the Press Act, less resort to the martial law, Defence of India Act, specifically denouncing its recent application in banning Mrs. Besant from Bombay, and immediate enactment of a free and compulsory measure of elementary education. He insisted that Indians should have long since been admitted to royal commissions in the army and navy, asking, if Indians are good enough to fight as sepoys and privates, why are they not good enough to occupy the position of officers? Jinnah concluded his Bombay Conference address with the all-absorbing question of Hindu-Muslim unity. I believe all thinking men are thoroughly convinced that the keynote of our real progress lies in the goodwill, concord, harmony, and cooperation between the two great sister communities. The true focus of progress is centered in their union, but the solution is not that difficult. Jinnah was speaking as an advocate for the Muslim community as a whole. He was not expressing his own political ideology or reflecting his own experience. The burden of sacrifice, he argued, fell upon the majority community, yet their reward would be commensurate. I would therefore appeal to my Hindu friends to be generous and liberal and welcome and encourage other activities of Muslims, even if it involves some sacrifice in the matter of separate electorates. It is a question of transfer of the power from bureaucracy to democracy. Let us concentrate all our attention and energy on this question alone for the present. The Hindus and the Muslims should stand united and use every constitutional and legitimate means to effect that transfer as soon as possible. We are on a straight road. The promised land is within sight. Forward is the motto and clear course for young India. Never was Jinnah more optimistic. The future of India seemed as bright, as full of life, hope, and light as did his own future with Ruti. They were born to different communities, yet love scaled every height, reduced to rubble or barriers. So at least it must have seemed to him then, as at the peak of his creative political powers, on the road to his triumph at Lucknow. First, he went to Calcutta, where the Imperial Legislative Council still met for its winter session. The New Delhi of Lutyens and Baker, rising so slowly on the spacious plain of south of the old city's massive wall and gates that it would not be ready for the council use till the late 1920s. Before October ended, Jinnah was able to convince 18 other elected members of Calcutta's council to sign his Memorandum of the 19, which was then presented to the Viceroy and sent on to Whitehall. The memorandum demanded that elected representatives of legislative councils should select all Indian members who would, in future, serve on executive councils. Legislative councils, moreover, should have a substantial majority of elected representatives, and the franchise should be broadened, with Muslims or Hindus, wherever they are in a minority, being given proper and adequate representation. A Supreme Council of not fewer than 150 members and provincial councils of from 60 to 100 members were recommended. Councils were to enjoy greater responsibilities and parliamentary freedoms, and the position of the Secretary of State should be abolished, replaced by 2 permanent under-secretaries, with one being Indian, with salaries placed on the British estimates. In any scheme of imperial federation, India should be given through her chosen representatives a place similar to that of the self-governing dominions. Provincial governments should be made autonomous. A full measure of local self-government was demanded immediately. The right to carry arms should be granted to Indians on the same conditions as to Europeans, and Indian youths should be equally eligible for royal commissions in the armed forces. The memorandum provided a skeletal constitution for an Indian dominion, which, had this proposal been accepted by the British after World War I, could have taken its place within the British Commonwealth, united, loyal to every ideal for which the Allies had fought, progressively modernizing under responsible leadership. The war was still far from over, however, and the full report of how Indian arms had sustained their worst defeat in Mesopotamia was yet to be disclosed, reducing British faith in anything Indian to its lowest point, even as the revolution soon to rock Russia would strip the Allies of their eastern wing. The British War Cabinet tragically lacked the vision or desire or energy to focus attention upon and take the outstretched hand of united India. The winter of 1916 had offered Great Britain as well as India one of those rare opportunities in history when a cresting wave could be caught and ridden towards a welcoming shore, but if missed, left to crash with murderous impact on the heads of those too preoccupied, timid, or ill prepared to seize the swiftly changing moment. Jinnah caught a spectacular ride on the crest of a formula his ingenious legal mind had fashioned, and which he was able to convince Congress President A.C. Mazumdar to accept after meeting with him for 2 days in Calcutta in mid-November. The key to their Lucknow Pact lay in agreeing upon percentages of guaranteed Muslim members for each of the Legislative Council, 1/3 at the centre and in Bombay, 1/2 in Punjab, 40% in Bengal, 30% in the United Provinces, 25% in Bihar and Orissa, and 15% in the central provinces and in Madras. Except for Punjab and Bengal, where Muslim representation was slightly less than the fraction demographic equivalence warranted, the minority community received a louder legislative voice than population estimates alone would have dictated, as an even more vital safeguard to reassure Muslims who feared losing Islamic identity within a future Hindu Raj. The pact provided that no bill nor any clause, therefore, nor a resolution introduced by a non-official member affecting one or the other community, which question is to be determined by the members of that community in the Legislative Council concerned, shall be proceeded with. If 3/4 of the members of that community in the particular council, imperial or provincial, oppose the bill or any clause thereof or the resolution, Jinnah left no loopholes in the contracts he drafted. All that is great and inspiring to the common affairs of men, for which the noblest and most valiant of mankind have lived and wrought and suffered in all ages and all climes, is now moving India out of its depths, declared President Jinnah from the Muslim League's rostrum on December 30th, 1916. The whole country is awakening to the call of its destiny and is scanning the new horizons with eager hope. A new spirit of earnestness, confidence, and resolution is abroad in the land. In all directions are visible the stirrings of a new life. The Mussalmans of India would be false to themselves and the traditions of their past had they not shared to the full the new hope that is moving India's patriotic sons today, or had they failed to respond to the call of their country. Their gaze, like that of their Hindu fellow countrymen, is fixed on the future. But gentlemen of the All India Muslim League, remember that the gaze of your community and of the whole country is at this moment fixed on you. The decisions that you take in Tilt Historic Hall and at this historic session of the League will go forth with all the force and weight that can legitimately be claimed by the chosen leaders and representatives of 70 million Indian Mussalmans. On the nature of those decisions will depend, in a large measure, the fate of India's future, of India's unity, and of our common ideals and aspirations for constitutional freedom. Jinnah would never again speak so passionately from a public platform. He spoke of bureaucratic British, shallow, bastard, and desperate political maxims, often flung into the face of Indian patriots, noting such cliches as Indians are unfit to govern themselves and democratic institutions cannot thrive in the environment of the East, rejecting them all as baseless and silly. President Jinnah hailed the living and vigorous spirit of patriotism and national self-consciousness, this pent-up altruistic feeling and energy of youth that was surging through India's pulse. He said, the most significant and hopeful aspect of this spirit is that It has taken its rise from a newborn movement in the direction of national unity, which has brought Hindus and Muslims together, involving brotherly service for the common cause. This vital portion of his Lucknow address later proved so embarrassing to the League's goals that it was excised from the official pamphlet subsequently published and reproduced by advocates of the Pakistan movement. Such censorship was, however, surely as misguided as misleading, for to ignore the potent power of Jinnah's commitment to Hindu-Muslim unity in 1916 would make it impossible fully to appreciate the tenacity of his later determination to bring Pakistan to fruition. Jinnah understood perfectly that India's only hope of emerging as a national entity, independent and strong, from under the heel of British imperial rule was through prior abatement of communal fears, suspicions, and residual anxieties. His standing within the Congress was such that he managed to persuade colleagues there of the overriding national value of conceding a large enough quota of elective legislative council seats to Muslims to be able to convince the League that joining forces with Congress in articulating a single national set of demands was, in fact, in their own best communal interest. This delicately negotiated settlement attested as much to his remarkable legal talents as it did to his passionate nationalist commitment. Dynamic optimism made Jinnah predict that at least half our constitutional battle had been won already. The United Indian demand, based on the actual needs of the country and framed with due regard to time and circumstances, must eventually prove irresistible. With the restoration of peace, the Indian problem will have to be dealt with on bold and generous lines, and India will have to be granted her birthright as a free, responsible, and equal member of the British Empire. It all seemed so clear and simple then, so rational. The Congress League plan, called the Lucknow Pact, provided a blueprint for independent India's constitution. Jinnah had, moreover, worked out every step for translating his scheme into legislative reality. After you have adopted the schemes of reforms, you should see that the Congress and the League take concerted measures to have a bill drafted by constitutional lawyers as an amending bill to the Government of India Act, which embodies the present constitution of our country. This bill, when ready, should be adopted by the National Indian Congress and the All India Muslim League, and a deputation of leading representative men from both the bodies should be appointed to see that the bill is introduced in the British Parliament and adopted. For that purpose, we should raise a large fund as possible to supply the sinews of war until our aim and object are fulfilled. His mind raced years ahead of most of his contemporaries, British and Indian alike. Unfortunately, the Lucknow Pact was never implemented, but its adoption marked the high point of Indian nationalist unity and provided as liberal and rational a constitutional framework for governing the subcontinent of South Asia as any subsequent plan devised after years of labor, vast expenditure, and much precious blood had been wasted. British rulers were not quite ready, however, to apply the Wilsonian principle of self-determination to their Indian empire. Congress met just a few days before the League in the same historic Kaisar Bagh, Royal Garden of Lucknow. Its first reunified session since 1907 split at Surat, attracting more than 2,300 delegates. "Blessed are the peacemakers," said President Mazumdar, welcoming Tilak and his aging new party back to the fold. Turning to the Hindu-Muslim question, Mazumdar announced it. has been settled and the Hindus and Muslims have agreed to make a united demand for self-government. The All India Congress Committee and the representatives of the Muslim League, who recently met in the conference at Calcutta, have, after 2 days' deliberation, in one voice resolved to make a joint demand for a representative government in India. Tilak, ever the political realist, remarked, "We are ready to make a common cause with any set of men. I shall not hold back my hand even from the bureaucracy if they come forward with a scheme that will promote the welfare of our nation." Jinnah's triumph was unmarred. The complete contract he had written was accepted by both parties. Now he was ready to put it to the acid test of personal application. He found a way to unite the two subjects uppermost in his mind and approached Sir Dinshaw Petit with a seemingly abstract question of what his views were about intercommunal marriages. Caught carefully off guard, Ruti's father expressed his emphatic opinion that it would considerably help national integration and might ultimately prove to be the final solution of intercommunal antagonism. Jinnah could not have composed a better response. He wasted no words in further cross-examining, informing his old friend that he wanted to marry his daughter. Sir Dinshaw was taken aback, as Justice Chagla, who was then assisting Jinnah in his chambers, so vividly recalled. He had not realized that his remarks might have serious personal repercussions. He was most indignant and refused to countenance any such idea which appeared to him absurd and fantastic.